Commonwealth's attorneys and I have concluded that the NCAA sanctions were overreaching and unlawful.
Someone's got to develop a product that you and I, as a consumer, are going to want to buy.
The country needs a comprehensive energy plan.
Welcome to another edition of For the Record. Today's topic will be the ongoing Sandusky scandal and Penn State University's response. Joining me, our guest today, Ray Blehar. Ray, thank you for being a part of the show.
Thanks for having me.
You came out with a very critical commentary report of your own on the entire investigation of Sandusky, the Sandusky case from '98 through now, and the responses by all parties involved. What prompted you to do that in the first place?
Well, when I first read the Freeh report, and I've been an analyst and investigator for 27 years, and I noticed obvious errors in the report that Penn State should rebut because he released it with no review. So I figured that Penn State would be making a review and rebuttal. I gave Rod Erickson at least 10 points that he could rebut, particularly any of the allegations that Penn State should have changed Sandusky's retirement due to the 1998 incident when he was completely cleared, and any penalty or should I say any harsh findings for '98. And then I was rather shocked, as probably the rest of the public was, and Penn Staters in particular, that the board had not rebutted the report, and then the NCAA sanctions came down. And I said, well, if they won't rebut it, I will. And my first letter was picked up in the blogosphere and run in some local papers. And then I became a blogger. I'd never done that before. And I've been blogging and investigating this ever since, and I'm putting the data out into the public as I uncover it.
Your background is in analyst. You're an analyst and a researcher and investigator. Talk about that for 27 years working for the government.
That's right. I started out in the federal government, in the Defense Mapping Agency of all places, because I majored in geography. But I quickly moved into management, particularly quality management, where you do a lot of statistical analysis, and then just through the years moving to different jobs in the financial management area, and different types of investigations. In fact, I was involved with the Exxon Valdez investigation in 1991 because my agency had made products. So I'm not a stranger to investigations. I was an inspector general for several years, which also involved me in some respects with criminal investigations when they occurred. And so after 25 years in the government, I actually went back to Penn State. I didn't go there originally. I was an IUP grad, went to Penn State, earned my MBA, and then this came up, and so all my experience and training has really adequately prepared me to do these types of reviews.
What type of reaction have you got through media as we sit here to tape the show? What kind of response have you gotten from the media about your report and your criticism of what happened in the Freeh report and everything else that happened?
Well, I've issued 2 reports. The first report, the only local media to pick up that was statecollege.com, okay, and that report specifically concerned DPW and CYS and how they had handled the situation, and they didn't handle it well according to the protective services laws. There's several things they should have done, like put safety plans in place to protect children, and during these investigations in '98 and 2008, Sandusky had complete access to children. There was no safety plan. There's notifications that CYS has to do at the outset of investigation. They have 24 hours to contact the Second Mile, since Jerry worked for Second Mile, and let them know he's under investigation. And at the close of the investigation, they also have to tell them the outcome. Second Mile claims never to be informed of the '98 investigation, and therefore they say when Penn State informed them in 2001, it was the first they ever heard of it. I don't know whether that's true or not, but I can say without a doubt, if CYS didn't inform them in '98, then that was a failure, okay? So Report 1 got a lot more play in the media to date, but these things have a long shelf life.
Certainly.
I think 72 media outlets picked up my first report. 151 have picked up the second one, but nobody's done any what I would say exclusive reporting on it or additional reporting on it. It was picked up by the Wall Street Journal and Yahoo News and some other big outlets. So we'll wait and see what comes out of that.
What has the response been from the media's aspect towards your report? Have they been favorable, non-favorable?
they tend not to have an opinion. I think anything that challenges the current narrative, which they're a part of, they really don't want to address it. They want this thing to go away. Okay, they're content that the 4 Penn State officials covered this up. Sandusky's in jail, and all the kids are safe. My contention is Jerry Sandusky going to jail hasn't made the kids in Pennsylvania one bit safer. Maybe for 10 kids or 20 kids, or the kids in Second Mile. But statewide, these kids are still in danger. I looked at the 2008 report on DPW. There were seven different categories of things that were looked at by Health and Human Services, and DPW needed improvement in all of them. One in particular that's very troublesome is once that CYS or DPW engages with a family that has an abused child or there's an abuse incident, how well is the child protected? And they scored 57%. Okay, so that means 43% of the time additional abuse happened after they had engaged CYS. And so that's a record that they need to improve on. And my first report said all I wanted from DPW and CYS was I want them to be reviewed. I don't want anybody punished. I just want to make sure that the system in Pennsylvania works as well as it can.
Why do you think the media wants this to all go away?
Well, I think it's an uncomfortable topic, for one, okay? And they want to believe that we have a boogeyman in Jerry Sandusky and we're all safe now. And that these measures that Penn State put in place have made people safer and they all can feel good about it. But how much child abuse goes on a college campus? You know, it's rare, okay? Sandusky bringing the kids to campus. And this is another interesting point. After 2001, okay, and there's some conjecture, really no abuse incidents took place at Penn State after Penn State intervened, all right? In fact, there was no other incidents of abuse from 2002 to 2005 when Aaron Fisher, he reconnected with Aaron Fisher. At least there's none that have been criminally prosecuted. So there's a 3-year gap in the record that says no abuse took place. Now, had that been shown early on in the investigation, you know, when the grand jury presentment came out, we had we had the McQueary case and then talk about all the other incidents that happened, and it looked as if had Penn State stopped McQueary or had stopped Sandusky after reporting this, the abuse would have stopped. But when you look at the actual chronology of the crimes, it shows that the abuse did stop, and most of the abuse occurred before all the Penn State officials, aside from Gary Schultz, who knew about 98 more than anyone else, had any knowledge of this. So to say that Penn State officials enabled Sandusky's abuse, well, the record doesn't show that.
That's a good stopping point for us. When we come back, more with Ray Blehar. We'll talk more about the Sandusky investigation. You're watching WHVL's For the Record. Back with more after this. Welcome back to For the Record. Our guest is Ray Blehar. Ray, we talked about 98 briefly in the first segment. Let's go right on to 2001, and that is really the crux of where everything goes from 2001. So let's talk about that.
Well, I think there's a lot of misunderstanding about 2001. The first thing that the media and the Attorney General have jumped all over was the fact that Penn State didn't learn the name of the child involved. Well, you have to step back for a minute and say, on the Sunday after being informed by Joe Paterno, Gary Schultz met with Wendell Courtney to discuss what to do. And according to Schultz's preliminary or grand jury testimony read at the preliminary perjury hearing, he said he recalled that Penn State had contacted Children and Youth Services. Wendell Courtney also, and it's in the Freeh report, in an email, he says he recalled Center County Youth Services also being contacted. All right. Well, at that point, if there's an ongoing investigation, Penn State's prohibited by state law from knowing the identity of the child. The child's identity and his family's identity is protected. And the state law is based on a federal law. The federal law requires all 50 states to protect the identity of child abuse victims. So for Penn State to be criticized for not learning the victim's name is just ignorance of the law, and Louis Freeh being a federal judge,
right,
prosecutor, and allegedly having people who have been involved in child abuse cases on his team, I'm hard pressed to understand how they didn't know this. So
But that, in essence, is the whole case. Certainly, it's the criminal case now against President Spanier, Mr. Schultz, and Mr. Curley as well, all based on one man's testimony. And from your initial looking at it, there's been 3 or 4 different stories from Mr. McQueary.
Yeah, Mike McQueary's story changed. And I think, again, this goes back to how you conduct an investigation and where Mr. Freeh has fallen down. During this investigation, you should be constructing numerous timelines of everything. Judge Freeh put one timeline in the report, and it's a comprehensive timeline. So if you break the timeline of reporting down in the McQueary incident, you see that Mike McQueary told his dad and Dr. Dronoff on Friday night. He told Joe Paterno on Saturday. Joe told Gary and Tim on Sunday, and Gary and Tim told Graham on Monday. Graham Spanier says that he was told that the incident happened around a corner out of sight. That matches what Dr. Dronoff said. Well, Spanier didn't know what Dronoff said. Schultz didn't know, and Curley didn't know. So who did they get it happened around a corner from? Well, it had to be Joe Paterno, because he's the only person that Mike McQueary talked to. So Joe Paterno, now at age 85 at the grand jury, he doesn't remember exactly what happened. But if you look at it, it says, well, McQueary had to say it happened around a corner for Spanier to be able to know it happened around a corner. So you put that timeline in place, and it really begs the question, what did Mike McQueary really tell people in 2001, and did that story change in 2010 when he talked to the police?
And now we're looking at a trial for Spanier, Curley, and Schultz in maybe 2014. So there's another 2 or 3, it's another year away from another opportunity for Mr. McQueary to tell the story. I mean, where now? But everything in the Freeh report basically was based on 2001 and then everything forward, but that was really what made Penn State guilty of all this in the Freeh report.
Yes, and now you have to remember another thing. Louis Freeh was working with the Attorney General, and his charge was not to do anything that would harm the ongoing prosecution of Jerry Sandusky or the ongoing investigation of Graham Spanier, Tim Curley, and Gary Schultz, which means if he finds exculpatory evidence, he's not going to bring it to the forefront because that damages the state's case. So from the reading of the Freeh report, what's on the record, Louis Freeh's team did not try to verify the claim that Gary Schultz or Wendell Courtney contacted CYS. And I think that's a critical oversight that everybody here misses. Sure, we will readily admit that this report wasn't given to DPW. But under the law, if you make the report to CYS, CYS has the responsibility to call Childline and make the report on behalf of the reporter. And the second part of the law is, the law says make or cause a report to be made. Penn State notified the charity Second Mile, Jack Rakovitz is a mandated reporter under the law, and even if he thinks it's a non-issue, as a mandated reporter, he has to report it. Rakovitz talked with, I believe it was Bruce Heim. I think Bruce Heim was in the paper, and he considered it a non-issue because he knew Sandusky to shower with kids through the Friend Fitness program that Second Mile had. So they didn't report 2001, yet they're not charged. And that's probably one of the things that clued me in on this case more than anything is, if you're going to charge Penn State with a failure to report, then you've got to charge Second Mile with a failure to report. And why hasn't Second Mile been charged, or Jack Rakovitz been charged?
What are your thoughts on why the Second Mile, no one in the Second Mile has really been pressed on this anyway, in any legal capacity?
I can't say anything based on the evidence that I've uncovered as to why, and I can't talk to the motives of the Attorney General. I can just say that it's curious, and it doesn't seem to flow logically with the law.
Was Dr. Dronoff in 2001, since he was a physician, was he a first reporter as well?
Under the law, it says that the child must be coming before you in your professional capacity. Okay. So again, this goes back to Dronoff. He's getting a secondhand report. The child's not in his care. Okay. You could make the argument, I would make the argument, that the child certainly was not under the care of Penn State because Sandusky's retired. Curly, Schultz, and Spanier don't deal with children on a daily basis. They're not mandated reporters. The school law that deals with protective services is K through 17 age children, which ties back to public schools. And so Penn State's not covered as a school reporter. So there's a lot of, what can I say, legalism here with the 2002 law or 2001 law, where there's certainly many loopholes in the law that would say Penn State really wasn't the people to report this incident.
That's a good stopping point for us as well. When we come back, we'll talk more with Ray Blehar about the Sandusky investigation and Penn State's response. You're watching For the Record on WHVL. Welcome back to For the Record. Our guest is Ray Blehar, and we're talking about the Sandusky investigation, the Freeh report, and Penn State's response to the Freeh report. Ray, they paid Louis Freeh, Penn State paid for it, so people would naturally assume that if they paid for it, they wanted what? Do you think they wanted what was in the report, or do you think Mr. Freeh wrote something to his audience?
Well, I think we all suspect that there was a predetermined outcome that the board wanted, since Mr. Freeh was a client of theirs, and so he wrote to that outcome. Now, when I did the review of just the chapters dealing with the NCAA sanctions, there were 50 findings in there, and I could only substantiate or partially substantiate 6. That's 12% of what Louis Freeh put out there as findings. So, and the errors aren't small errors. Okay, for somebody with a stature as a former FBI director and having a qualified staff, you should be able to get basic things right, like the trial verdicts. All right, well, in 3 cases, he gets the trial verdicts wrong for victims 5, 6, and 7. So when I looked in the report, it said his reference for those verdicts was the Commonwealth Bill of Particulars, which is a May document prior to trial. June. Right. Okay. So basically, Judge Freeh had a draft report in his hand. They conducted the trial, and they didn't go back and update the report. At least this is what I suspect, based on what happened in the trial. So you have Louis Freeh saying these children were victims of an assault, indecent assault. And no, Sandusky was not convicted of indecent assault in those cases. I pointed out the first error where he totally missed the federal and state laws on the confidentiality of child abuse victims. I think another interesting point is Spanier and Schultz failed to inform the Board of Trustees about these incidents. Well, look at the standing orders of the Board of Trustees. I mean, when you're an investigator, you have to cite a standard law policy first and then say how the policy was violated. In the case of the standing orders, the treasurer, Gary Schultz, does not have a responsibility to report legal matters to the board, nor does the president. That's reserved for the general counsel of Penn State. So if Louis Freeh wanted to make a finding, it was that the general counsel didn't make the report, not Spanier or Schultz. And in the case of 98, all that Spanier had at the time of that board meeting was one email that didn't even have Sandusky's name in it. So he had no wherewithal to make a report. So basically you have Louis Freeh saying, well, based on my standard or what I think should have happened, this is what I found. And again, I look at very basic things. I look at hard things too. Sure. But he cites policy AD 39, which is about minor youth on campus. And he says, memorandums of agreement have to be made between Penn State and a third party to use the campus. If you read AD 39, there's no such language in AD 39, okay? It's just not there. So that finding doesn't hold water. He made a finding that the university had never discussed the not the Freeh report, but the Cleary Act.
Sure.
But in 2003, they got feedback from an official working on the Cleary Act in the federal government who told them that they were not complying with the Cleary Act, and this official, who was interviewed by Louis Freeh, said, and Penn State admitted that they were not complying with the Cleary Act. So Freeh is clearly picking and choosing evidence, throwing evidence away that doesn't fit the narrative, and saying this is what happened. what is it, 17 emails that were used. Well, he found a lot more emails than 17 that pertained to the case, but there was only 17 that were incriminating email or something along that nature.
And to further that, the NCAA then takes the Freeh report and puts the sanctions on Penn State. I've heard rumor that Rodney Erickson says that he was threatened by Mark Emmert. Mark Emmert says he did not threaten Penn State in any way. Have you found anything out on either side of who's telling the truth and who isn't telling the truth?
I don't know who's telling the truth, but I can tell you this, that back some months before the Freeh report came out, President Erickson had made a series of statements about how things should work with the athletic department and a number of different things. And I believe Franco actually covers this in his town hall series. And there's like 5 points that Erickson made, and all 5 of these things tend to show up in the sanctions about how we're going to change the athletic department and how it's going to have to take a back seat to academics, which was never a problem at Penn State. Football wasn't ruling anything. So,
was there more of a rush to judgment or a rush to punishment from your viewpoint?
It was both. Okay, and I believe when what gets me as an educated person. Okay, how could a board of presidents of the NCAA take a report? Okay, and this may sound silly, but the appendices in the Freeh report are labeled 2, 3, 5, 6, and 10. Okay, can you tell me that the president who would oversee or be in academia, if he was handed a report like that and asked to grade it, he probably wouldn't grade it. If it was a doctoral dissertation, he'd have thrown it across the room, because he would say, can't you fix this?
Sure.
And the other question is, as an investigator, what's missing? What was there that's no longer there? And to me, that's the police report, psych reports, the laws, everything that's critical to an investigation.
Where do you go from here into the further investigation, quickly?
Second Mile Board of Trustees and the media are all upcoming reports.
When those are ready to go, please come back. We'd love to have you again.
All right, thank you very much.
Here. Thank you for watching this week's For the Record. Steve Miller here. Take care. Bye-bye.